Call to order for the Providence Public Schools Finance Subcommittee. My name is Tony Aiken. I'm your Finance Chairperson. And please note that we do not have a quorum, but this will be for informational purposes only. Therefore, we will be jumping right into presentation item 5.0 for the budget discussion.
Do you want to do Renaissance Learning, or are we going to skip that?
I'm happy to visit that. Do you? See.
Please do.
So Renaissance Learning is on the budget. This is our STAR product. It is the district benchmark. It's been the district benchmark since 2014. And it's been digital since 2016. The beauty of STAR is that we get a very discounted rate, and we use it in every school, every grade level, first grade and 10th grade. Then, of course, the older students take the SAT and SAT. So this is will be our 13th year with the product. And one thing I forgot to mention last year when I presented this is it's the only true district benchmark that is in Spanish. And we also use it for placement testing at the registration center. So two big things that we cannot get from any other product. So it kind of stands alone in that regard. And this is the exact same renewal price as last year. We saved about $58,000 this year on the renewal. We're locked in at a very discounted price.
That's wonderful. Thank you for annotating that. You mentioned that it's in two languages, English and Spanish.
And they will be English portion and the mathematics and Spanish. So we get a true measure of their math ability, not of their language ability.
That's good to hear. And the dollar amount represents a discount for 3 years. Is this great? You mentioned it was the same as last year. So in the following year, will it also remain the same?
It'll be the same, and we'll get the new improved version of the product for the same price.
Very good. Well, I am very pleased to hear that. The technical assistance, could you tell me about if there's been any troubleshooting of any issues technology speaking with the product and functionality, and how the 24-hour period for that support works?
We have 24/7 customer service. We also have a district rep exclusive to Providence. And fortunately for us, Renaissance uses what we call an API pull. It's a direct pull from our Skyward system. So it runs every night after midnight flawlessly. So it's very different from other programs that we have to send information to.
Very good. And the reports as requested, they include, you say here, for both students and staff usage and results. Do those come under review every 20, in every week, how are those reviewed?
They're available 24/7. We don't have to rely on the company. We can pull them ourselves, but we give the benchmark 3 times a year, and that's when we do the massive data pulls. And then we save that information all the way back to 2016.
Very good. Well, I appreciate you reviewing this contract. I'm pleased that it's rolling out very nicely. This is just an informational overview, so we will defer any voting until the full board meeting next week.
Thank you. As always, thank you.
Pleasure. And moving along, we will be jumping now into the PPSD budgetary discussions.
To Zach.
Good evening, Jim. Before we start, I want to share with you we're looking at our budget, our proposed budget as we move forward. I want you to know that this is not anything different from the work that we have done and we have shared with city officials. This is not the first time anyone has seen this budget that we shared with you today, so it's extremely important that I point that out. So as we go on, I'm going to pass it over to my deputy superintendent of operations, Zach, but I needed to make sure that everyone is aware that this is not the first time that anyone has seen this.
Thank you, Superintendent.
Thank you, Superintendent. So we are here to give you a budget update, and I'll be candid and upfront in saying this is a a very serious conversation we're about to have, one that we've spent a lot of time thinking about, one that, given our conversations last year, shouldn't come as a surprise, but frankly was not something we ever hoped we kind of a situation we find ourselves. But we do find ourselves in a very serious situation and felt, therefore it was really important to talk. Certainly with our school board finance and school board, but also the general kind of school community. So what I'd like to do is share a little bit about the kind of some context about the situation in which we find ourselves, some of the very difficult decisions that we need to make as a district, and then the timeline to do so. So I'll talk just big picture about, I think, what some of the key takeaways are for today, and then we'll go through in depth, but you should certainly feel free to stop and ask questions whenever you need. But what we're here to talk about today is a significant in-year budget gap that we are seeing in the district, primarily driven by revenue shortfall from the city. So let me share a little bit about that and other things about that future. So, as part of the intervention, the city committed to funding the district based on state law and increasing contributions to the district, but it has failed to do so in each of the years of the intervention, the first 4 years of the intervention. And despite an increase this year, the district is still paying for the lack of contributions in prior years. And while we are all, as citizens of the city, cognizant of the difficult decisions that any municipality needs to make, what we can't square is kind of seeing clear evidence that there are decisions being made to fund other areas within the city, even though there are obligations. The school district has made kind of consistent that need time and time again and every year, and we'll talk through all the ways in which we've done that. But despite that, while the state has stepped up in terms of aid to the district over the past 4 or 5 years, aid from the city to PTSD students has actually gone down since the state intervention began. At that same time, so we face we're facing significant revenue challenges. We've also seen a significant increase in student need, particularly among our multilingual learners and differently abled students, that lead to additional annual recurring costs. These are groups of students that frankly were not particularly well supported prior to the intervention. I think we're all very proud of the work we've done under the intervention, but supporting those students requires adequate resources. And so as we've added those resources, compounded with the revenue challenges that we're seeing, it puts pressure on our financial situation. We as a district have had to make some very difficult decisions over the past 4 or 5 years, inclusive of closing schools, changing transportation, reducing headcount in the central office, to adapt and adjust to both some city revenue shortfall issues, enrollment declines, and other things. But we are now at the point where the gap between what is owed under the Crowley Act, what we believe our students need at a minimum, and what we're being provided by the city is far apart. And so, and we'll walk you through kind of, again, the math here, but we are projecting a current $10.9 million gap for the current fiscal year, both because we still do not have a resolution for last fiscal year, about 24, in terms of the city's contribution, as well as underfunding for the current fiscal year. So because of that, we are projecting in the late winter, early spring, some potential cash flow challenges in the district, meaning we might need to make decisions very soon to prevent that outcome from happening. So now let me just walk through kind of each of those in turn, because I do think it's important to put some of the substance behind what I just shared. So first and foremost, the Crowley Act was designed to prevent cities from underinvesting during state interventions. And so what you'll see there in that top box is the language included in the statute, which says that cities must fund schools at the same level as in the prior academic year, increased by the same percentage of the state total school aid. Put another way, however much the state increases aid, that is the expectation for what the city should do. Some of that, as you can see, is based on just historic evidence of not kind of adequate funding. And on the right-hand side, you'll see some of the funding prior to the intervention, with a $54 million cumulative increase from the state compared to just a $3.6 million increase from the city. I think in your handout, I apologize, I don't have it on the screen, But Sherry, then you have the collaboration agreement between the city of Providence and the Rhode Island Department of Education. That was outlined at the beginning of the intervention and was basically an agreement on both sides on how each party thought what was needed to support schools moving forward. I'll direct you to page 6, second paragraph, where it models this language and essentially the city commits beyond what was in the legislation in this agreement with RIDE, committed to doing this. There were also commitments from the city leadership after this in the first fiscal year that they would do this. And also reminders, if you look at your other handout, from the State Department of Revenue, being notified annually when they did not meet those obligations, that their budget was not in compliance. So I share all this to say that this was something that was not, should not be a surprise. The kind of obligations on the city's part should not be a surprise to anyone. They were committed to both in state law, but also with the city and the school district and RIDE at the beginning of the intervention, and then were repeatedly reminded as an obligation year after year. But despite that, the first 4 years of the intervention, there were no increases in funding from the city. To show you what that means, so that's kind of the statutory context, the shared commitment we had. Here's what the practical impact of that is. So if you look on the left on the chart you see here, this shows several kind of levels of funding. The gray line, that top line, indicates the amount that would be owed under the Crowley Act. From each fiscal year, you see that number going up. The blue line at the bottom is what the city has included in their budget in each fiscal year. And as I mentioned before, the first 4 fiscal years, same exact amount that was included prior to the intervention, with this current fiscal year being the one that has an increase. Orange indicates what we actually received. So with the prior administration, we reached agreement for roughly $11 million that would cover those 3 fiscal years. And so that's what you see in the orange line. And then those red dots are what we've requested in each of the years and are under dispute.
Just please, a second, when you look at those red dots, I really want you to focus on that. Because that is when you hear someone or when you hear a myth that we're trying to bankrupt the city, absolutely not. We know this is our city and we don't want to do that. But our students depend on the advocacy that we do for them. So we know that would probably cost the city a problem. So we turned around and said, okay, look at this. We're not asking for the 155. We're not asking for the 160 and 24 and 25. We're actually asking for the 148 for last year. And then for this year, it's 147.7, which is not even the 148 yet. But this is what we need to make sure that the district continue to function correctly.
So let me ask, the 168.4 is the agreement outlined around the collaboration agreement in this document. And the school department is asking for a median of the 147.7, which is outlined in this letter dated May 30th, 2024.
Yeah, this is from the Department of Revenue saying that the cities, this is from the state to the city saying the Department of Municipal Revenue has reviewed the city of Providence's budget and determines that it is not approved, in line with the state statute in terms of what's they're obligated to include in their municipal budget.
And then the proposal by the city to split the residential tax rate class 1 property into ownership, occupied and non-occupied, that was not approved.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm less familiar with that. It looks like there might have been several things that the agency found not to be. So again, you understand challenges with any municipal finances or the school department finances, and again, to reiterate the superintendent's point, we are not looking to bankrupt the city. But I do think what is striking is oftentimes I think the concern is there is not funding to go around. But when we look at both what you'll see on the left is funding by department over the past 10 years. You'll note PPSD is one of the second to last in terms of department level growth over the past 10 years. And then if you just look within the intervention, what the funding change has been, and as we review city budget documents, what we see is that since the start of the intervention, other city departments, excluding PPSD, have grown by roughly $88 million, which is a 23% increase over that time. Over that same time, PPSD's allocation from the city has increased by 5.5 million, which is a 4% increase, all of which happened just in this last fiscal year. So it is, we are trying to square the idea that there is not additional funding available for PPSD when there are investments and conscious choices being made to fund other projects.
So in short, in summarizing this, is it stating that other departments outside of the school have grown 23 percentile, while the schools has only been increased 4%? Is that correct?
For the past.
Comparison, creating like a 19% difference.
Correct. The outcome is when we compare this to other municipalities, here you'll see what each municipality spends per student from their city budget for student funding. You'll note Providence is both lower than many of the municipalities you see here. And just as concerningly, also has one of the lowest levels of growth. So while Pawtucket spends less per student, they've had almost double the growth in terms of what the city's contributed. So really, Providence is the outlier aside from Woonsocket in terms of both the amount and the amount of growth that they've seen in terms of city aid per student.
And the municipal revenue per pupil is that top number, $4,775 per pupil.
Yeah, and that is if you take the entire city's contribution and divide it by the number of students served. And I think it's important to note, and what you'll see on this slide is that the city contribution is that we receive as a district is not just for PPSD students, it's to cover all students in public schools in the city. So whether it's a PPSD school or a public charter school, that pie is what you divide the amount from the city by. So it's important to note, so when we look at what the change in aid has been, so since the start of the intervention, we've seen a roughly 30.5 million increase in state aid. So compared to FY25 to what we have this current fiscal year, state aid has increased by over 30 million. The amount of net aid we've received as a district has actually gone down from the city by 12.5 because over that time, while city aid has stayed the same, we passed those funds through to students who attend public charter schools. So the amount that actually comes to PPSD students has gone down by over $12 million since the start of the intervention. So, I think we've been fortunate on the state aid side to see increases, but continue to face challenges on the city side. Throughout this time, we have done our best to communicate in as many forms as we can about both how we build our budget and some of the questions and concerns we have. So what you see on the left-hand side is some of the engagement we had over the course of last year, some of which was with this body starting in November and December. But we've also met several times with the city administration throughout the year through the summer to share some of the concerns that we have and that we brought before this board. So starting all the way back in February and March, we were sharing projections both for the current fiscal year and the future fiscal year. We then shared our more formal requests with the city in April, have presented with the city council and school board in May, and then met again in August 2024 to express some of the concerns we have about the potential budget challenges that we would be facing given the revenue shortfalls in front of us.
Have you received any feedback from that latest meeting with the city administration and council leadership?
We did. I think we were able to share this information. I think there's some fundamental disagreements on funding schools. I think I wouldn't want to speak for anyone there, but I think there was some good exchanges, but I think some other areas where we just have some fundamental disagreements about what is appropriate. So we spent a lot of time talking about revenue, and that's a big part of the challenges that we face. But you'll also note that we've seen some significant growth in our areas of some of our different student populations, including differently able students, students who receive specialized services, as well as our multilingual learners. So if you look at differently able students, that's a population we've seen really grow in need and number over the past few years, most notably in the number of students having to be sent out of district, both for tuition and transportation, along with the additional classrooms we've had to open. We've seen a lot of early learners come in with very severe needs, and so that's led us to add classrooms that will kind of we had to add year over year as that student population has grown. You'll note that on just for differently able students, since FY22, we've seen a roughly $18 million increase to support those students. And that's just not a one-time cost. That is something that is now kind of fixed in our budget that we need to support year after year. Multilingual learners, similarly, for those who aren't familiar, prior to the intervention, there was a settlement agreement with the Department of Justice for the district's failure to appropriately support multilingual learners. Through the leadership of our Sadie Stewart, Jen Eflon, and our full multilingual team, and certainly all our teachers and administrators, we've seen tremendous progress here, in particular from where we started at the beginning of the intervention. Some of that has been through support from additional staff, additional translation and interpretation services, as well as PD and certification reimbursement. But that costs money. I mean, that costs money that we need to spend each year. And once we get out of this agreement, which we are very excited about and hope happens soon, these costs will not go away. Like these are kind of table stakes that we need to appropriately serve those students at a minimum. And so like there's no turning back. It's not something we would ever want to do. But these are real costs that the district has to incur. So these compounded with the revenue challenges we mentioned really pose a challenge to the district.
I have a question on the cost breakdown of comparison. So here, increases from fiscal year 22 compared to current fiscal year 25. So these costs, are they what the difference is?
That's the difference. So our full out-of-district tuition budget is 20 million. So it was 18 or so, 17 or 18 in FY22. So this isn't all just total cost. This is new costs.
And the out-of-district tuition, does that include charter schools?
No. No, this is for students who need a different setting than the one in the district. And some of that has to do with a significant increase in severe students with severe needs, but also staffing and the kind of lack of special education teachers that we're seeing both in Rhode Island and
Chair, you can also see here where it says pre-K and special education. When we look at the revenue, it costs us about $15,000 per student who are here. But look at the difference as it increases, the needs increase, and then when we have to go out of state, it almost triples.
Stop, yes. And is that because the services are not offered here currently, and not provide that level of support?
So again, some of these issues were known, right? So we've seen enrollment declines, and we've identified that as a challenge. But responsibly, we took action as a district to address that. So what you'll see are some of the reductions and difficult decisions we've already had to make over the past 4 or 5 years. We've had to close or consolidate 5 schools. We've significantly reduced staff in our middle and high schools through rescheduling. We've seen transportation efficiencies. So even in just this year, we've changed bell times. We've had longer walking distance for students to make our transportation more efficient. And we made some significant reduction in central office. So just in this past year, we had almost a 20% reduction in FTEs in our central office. We know that there are financial challenges, and as stewards of public dollars, we've already had to make a number of difficult decisions to get to where we are. But really the kind of persistent underfunding from the city has led us to a spot where we are now forced to make some potential decisions that, as painful as what you see here are, like the ones that come next are even more. And we are frankly talking about, focused on what we're talking about having to do in this current fiscal year. But fast forward to just the next fiscal year, and we are again in the same kind of role where we have to just focus on. So to talk through the gap, then if we bring some of the revenue challenges we talked about, some of the expense drivers that we've seen. What you'll note here is how we kind of come to a $10.9 million gap that we currently face. So we first look at FY24, which in total is a roughly $20 million gap. Most of that is from the unresolved city revenue, so a roughly $18 million difference. And as a reminder, what was included from the city in FY24 that is under litigation is the same amount of funding that was provided prior to the intervention, so no increase. And the big delta there is what was included in our budget. There are some small changes, both positive. We had some increase in Medicaid revenue, which is helpful. And like I said, though, we also had some increases in out-of-district tuition that grew in the middle of the year. So again, a $20 million gap driven largely by an $18 million revenue shortfall from the city. In FY25, we have a roughly $10 million gap, again, primarily driven by city revenue shortfall. So the city revenue, the city contribution provided is roughly $12 million short from what was asked. And again, roughly $20 million short of what was statutorily required. There was some good news in the final state aid, and we were appreciative of increases in state aid, which helped. We've had a few expense increases, including there were some changes to retiree increases at the end of the fiscal year, which led to some increased costs of district. But all taken together, a roughly $10 million gap in FY25. So collectively a $30 million gap that the district faces. We have reserve funds. We had kind of identified those, and we're happy to talk at length about how those came to be. But really the idea was we had known we might face tough financial times, either through enrollment declines or if city revenue didn't pick up. And the expectation was that we'd be using some of that each year to help soften any blows. But right now we're having to put all of it on the table, all of it at once, given the shortfalls that we just mentioned. We also received from ESSER, which is the stimulus funds that we received. There's an amount that we can take in indirect, which is revenue into the district. We obviously would have preferred to spend that directly on students, but we had to take it in as indirect costs, which then can be used and applied against this gap. So taken together, that's roughly $20 million in one-time revenue that we can use. And while that's a significant amount of money, it still leaves us with a roughly $10 to $11 million gap that is unfunded once all revenue sources are put on the table. So I'll just pause there. I mean, that is a non-trivial number. I think when we talked about some of the cuts we were facing last year, from one year to the next, they weren't that different than that. But what we're talking about here is, is making that amount up in the course of a year, which can be incredibly difficult.
I have one question. I'd like to revert back to chart on page slide 9, where we highlight the multilingual murders in the bottom of the chart. And that difference showing the increased cost. So can you walk me through, in terms of, the translation and interpretation services, the staffing in the curriculum and professional development? I know, can you walk me through how those increases, I know that we were on track with some contracts that were approved. for that, so I'm a little surprised about that cost being so high of a difference.
Yeah, so let me start with the translation and interpretation services. So what you'll see here is what was budgeted in FY '22 and what was budgeted in FY '25. So I'll start by saying one of the findings from the Department of Justice settlement agreement was that we were not appropriately supporting multilingual learners and their families. And so one of the corrective actions we needed to take was to provide better interpretation and translation services. So historically, there was just, honestly, like those services weren't provided. So a family might come into a main office, might come into here, and people might try to use their phone or something that was like not appropriate or well suited to our parents. And so it's not that we just weren't doing these things for our families, and the Department of Justice, correctly called the district out for not providing that service. So what we're doing now, I think, frankly, is the level of service we should have been providing all along. So it's not as much of a cost overrun as a need to right size the level of services. And I forget the exact percentage, but I mean the majority of our students have speak a language other than English at home. So this type of thing is critical to make sure families and students feel welcome and supported. Staffing, to talk through there. So historically we had oftentimes our multilingual learners were sheltered, which meant they were taught in a separate class. They may not integrate with their other peers, and oftentimes they weren't receiving the appropriate level of English language development supports. Staffing here provides teachers who can work at different schools and support students with English language development. It also helps us provide social work services through a bilingual social worker. So again, these were many of the things that frankly we were required to do as part of the Department of Justice, but also are good for kids and things we should have been doing a long time ago.
So these are making these services more robust and encompassing all of that you just outlined.
That's right.
Very good. And then as far as is it differently abled students, and that is a stark increase, is there any, I guess, any reasoning why that's such a stark increase? What's causing fundamentally our students in this group to increase exponentially in that period of time?
I think it's twofold. So one is that I think student need and the number of students with IEPs or significant needs documented in IEPs has gone up. And that is kind of what we've seen as students who were born 1-year-old, 2-year-old during COVID, often weren't able to get access to early intervention that students would typically, young ones would typically get. So when they show up with PTSD, they have far more severe needs. So most of this is honestly at the pre-K, kindergarten, and grade 1 level. It's those students coming in. It's not as, I mean, we certainly have needs at upper grades, but where it's growing the most is at our early grades. I think it's exacerbated by we've seen some significant, both as we need to open more classrooms, there are fewer and fewer special education teachers, and that's not something we hear alone in Providence. It's something we hear from our colleagues across the state and frankly across the nation as well. We've done a number of things working across our teams to address this now, and so we were excited to reach an agreement with the Providence Teachers Union on ways to differentiate compensation for teachers in our highest need classrooms, and we are thankful that they were good partners in this because it's allowed us to fill a number of vacancies that have been persistently vacant. But I wouldn't say we're out of the woods. There's a lot more work to be done, but I think we've taken some pretty aggressive steps to address that and support that, while making sure we're supporting students appropriately. So, again, to highlight the gravity of this, we do have this projected in-year gap, which options are limited once you're in the middle of the year for, schools are up and running. There's some statutory limitations on certified staff and any personnel actions just to be directed to, you are not able to lay off certified staff during the year. Not that we want to, but you are limited in what you can do in the middle of the year to address the gap that's sizable. So what I'm about to share are some of the reductions we've started to make, but ones we'll need to make very soon, decisions we'll need to make very soon to prevent any further cash flow issues. And I'll share, we are putting these forward not because we think they are good or what is needed, but we are limited in our options for addressing the challenges we face. So to share a little bit about some of the things that we are considering. The first three are ones that we are already doing and are already in place, including a spending freeze, an overtime freeze, and a central office administrative freeze. That spending freeze is, well, basic supplies that are being provided, we aren't allowing, or I know being very, restrictive in the amount of ways that funding can be spent beyond kind of basic school operations. Overtime, aside from emergencies, so a pipe breaks and someone needs to show up, we need something to get ready for the start of school. Outside of that, really restricted in overtime we're providing. And then the central office, I would please spend for all non-critical positions. So the next ones are ones we are considering, and again, many of which, or most of which, or all of which, will have a direct and immediate negative impact on students, and many of which will have direct negative impacts on the Huron Action Plan goals that we've been set for us. So, to walk you through line by line, the first is to consider furlough days for non-union staff in the central office and at our schools. These are days that are essentially days off that are unpaid. So staff, do not receive that payment, nor will they ever receive that payment once you do those furlough days. The next is to withdraw our contributions to the capital revolving fund. So this was something that we went into several years ago that allows us to get reimbursed 90 cents on the dollar. So every dollar you spend, you're typically getting $5 back over the course of several years. It's allowed us to do a lot of health and safety work. We've replaced boilers with this. We've installed bottle filling stations at our schools. We're doing the Hope auditorium. Like, there's a lot of stuff that this allows us to do, not just for this year, but in future years. But a tough decision we might need to make to actually just do less of the needed construction work we need to do to our schools to get cash in the door. Moving on, beyond furlough days, the consideration of laying off non-union, non-certified staff at schools. Many of our staff at schools are certified, and therefore, their reductions can't be made. But there are groups of individuals that could potentially be impacted through layoffs. And these are roughly ordered by kind of severity, so it's hard to say some of the next few ones because they are so challenging. But the consideration of potentially eliminating athletic programming and spring, so fall sessions are underway. But the costs to run those programs are things that, again, we think are really important for student engagement. For those who've done sports before, know it's a really important learning experience. It is a lot of the reason many of our students come to school every day. So a big concern there, but something under consideration. The next is RIPTA and reducing eligibility for students. So right now we provide passes to anyone over a mile. This would be raising that eligibility to 2 miles, which we have grave concerns about over the ability to have students attend every day in our schools. The last two, the ELL certification reimbursement. This is something that frankly concerns us for a number of reasons. One of which is, I think we made really good progress with the Department of Justice, and something like this could set us back years in terms of our ability to get out of that agreement. The last one is deeper school-based position cuts and freezes. So this would be either freezing classroom positions, which we haven't done yet. So meaning if there's a classroom teacher vacancy that we just wouldn't fill it, keep it substitute. Or we might freeze or eliminate teacher assistant positions. So what you see here is if we eliminated one teacher assistant for each of our ECS, autism and behavior classrooms. Those are some of our classrooms with most significant student needs that have, require additional staff. And so what you see here is elimination of one teacher assistant in each of those classrooms, which I think is roughly 38 or 40 individuals. So I'll pause there. I think the timeliness of making these decisions in the coming weeks is our concerns are with potential cash flow in January and February. And so we need to make these decisions now so that, we have enough funds come January and February to pay vendors, and customers. But I'll pause there to see if there are any questions.
Well, I have one question regarding the revolving fund, withdrawal. What's the current balance in the fund?
So the fund is kept at the city, and I think the total balance is like a little over $6 million. This represents the portion that the district put in initially. So there's an agreement with an ordinance passed by the city that basically says that if any party withdraws from this, they're able to kind of take out a portion of what they put in. So 3.6 reflects that amount of a total balance of 6 million. So the district was the one, when we started this, we initiated it, and the majority of funds came from the district to kick that off. So the majority of the funds, not all the funds, but the majority will come back to the district.
In the layoff for non-union staff, how many positions would that encompass?
Do you recall? I think it might have been 6 to 7.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we're stretching, almost 10. That it, it all varies, different salaries. Who is eligible for.
There's specific type of staff positions. Can you get into more what you're looking at
I don't
for
know,
those types of staff?
certain.
Yeah, I want to be thoughtful because there are, it's a limited number of individuals, and so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, these are some positions we have that are non-union that support. They're not teaching students, but they're doing critical roles for operations or school climate and culture.
I only ask because it's the lowest estimated savings amount. So that, it's a concern when you have these critical positions that, help with our students, and then, it's a low amount there for the estimated savings. And if we're looking at a gap of 10.9 million, potential savings here is $1 million over. So is that something you're looking closer at?
Yeah, I think as we start
Potentially.
implementing any of these, we'll need to look closer. I do think, not to be dramatic, but every day or week we're delaying making this, we don't have to make any of these decisions, the smaller the savings amount gets, while the 10.9 stays the same. So, these, when we, even if we project these a month ago, we've had to revise them down, given that we're probably going to be here.
Just think about all the potential that this have to impact our students, and looking at our action plan and meeting our goals. And we know that one of them is just attendance. I mean, we look at some of these, it's gonna cause a huge impact on attendance. Another one's gonna cause a huge impact on social emotional needs of students. So each one of these has a huge impact on our students.
And Rick, have we gone to, and we spoke briefly about that separate, have we gone back to Rick to try to renegotiate with them about, having some support from them, with passes or discounts or reduction in fares?
Yeah, we've had frankly for years discussions with them about, particularly as when more students are riding, we've had discussions about how we could adjust the amount we pay them. I would say those discussions are ongoing. We've had just up until this month some very kind of serious discussions about how we address the number. I don't want to speak for with the leadership. I know they also face financial challenges and I'm sure are pressed make changes, but, I think we believe we're paying, more than enough for our students, given that we're one of the biggest, customers of Ripta, but it's been an ongoing conversation we've had.
That's a major concern because attendance matters campaign increase. We're showing with attendance rates and that would be a major factor of concern. And if there's anything that I can do or the board can do to try to address that with them so we can work collaboratively with them, I'd be happy to do that as well.
That's going to be the end of our presentation. I think we are in the early. We wanted to share this with you, and I think we'll plan to come and back to the full school board to share it again, because we've tried to work on alternatives. We met with city leadership earlier, late summer, and so I think we are wanting to raise this to for kind of public awareness now, knowing that in the next few weeks we'll need to start implementing many of these, absent some change in revenue or expenses that we don't yet know about.
May I ask one other question regarding the deeper school-based position cuts / freezes? So is it a potential cut or freeze or combination of the two?
It would be a combination of the two. So to share, like if we were to eliminate one teacher assistant position in each of the classrooms, it would either be a layoff if the position is filled, or it would be just a closure of a vacancy if it wasn't. So depending on how many of the positions are filled, so it'd be a mix of either closing a vacant position or laying off. But we've been able to fill a number of these positions, so the vast majority of them be layoffs.
And that's more for special needs, highly disabled students. That's highly concerning.
Concerns us, and I
Yes,
think it is, as I mentioned, we in terms of, you think about a school, vast majority of our staff are teachers, certified staff that we cannot eliminate or lay off this point in the year, so we really are limited to other positions, all of which have school operations, school culture, school safety concerns, just like basic student safety concerns start to come up when you are.
Very stuck.
Sure, you can me ask a question?
Of course, Secretary Hughes, Ms. June.
Actually, I may have more than one question or comment, if that's okay.
Please.
This is deeply concerning, and I think that those of us who were present at the board and in Chair Aiken's meetings this spring kind of heard in broad strokes that some of this was a possibility, but I think this is likely the first time that most of us in the wider community are focused on this specificity and this horrifying list of terrible options that are in front of us right now if we do not get more funding. I think there is not a single thing on this list as either a board member or a mother of students in the system that is not going to have drastic impacts in the immediate future as well as long term. As one tiny example out of all of the things being terrible choices, I would say that, as a parent of students in high school, to think about the combination of the message that we would send to our high school students to say, attendance matters, we want you to succeed. Please walk 2 miles in the wind and snow in the winter. And by the way, you now cannot play basketball, you now cannot play baseball, you now cannot spend that extra time with your friends. I mean, I just don't see how we don't set ourselves so far back with attendance and wellness overall for students by just with those two things. Pulling back from that emotional response that I'm having, I would also say that Superintendent, I think you touched on, as well as Mr. Scott, I think, I'm really concerned about the time period that we're in right now, both with trying to make strides to meet the requirements of and hopefully exit our agreement with the Department of Justice to serve our MLL students, as well as the current climate. Like, we just had conversations in the summer and early fall talking about potential transition to local control of our school district. And one of the things that we have to demonstrate as a district and as a city is that we are being financially responsible and that we can do that without state intervention. And once again, between those two things, when I look at this list of things, all that's doing is setting us back on all of those metrics. But what it really means is we are not doing the right thing for students. And so I know there's a lot of conversation and back and forth, and there's always, the law is never 100% clear, and there's always room for interpretation and disagreement. My concern is that while adults are sorting this out, that children are going to suffer right now. Right now. Every single one of these, they already are. Like, we already cut staff, we already made things worse for our children this year because we couldn't agree on this, and now we are taking this to a level that is frankly unfathomable. And you know what? None of that was a question, and my apologies, because I'm not sure I've actually asked a question here. I would, if I may, I know there are a few other parents and maybe some students and other folks here. I'm just wondering if anyone else, if Chair Aiken would allow, if there are other questions or comments.
I am open to additional questions, concerns, feedback, ideas, and I think that we need to, and I agree, we need to look at ways to not just cut our budget, but increase our revenue and be creative in doing that. I know I made some proposals earlier this year that may have seemed unorthodox. I think maybe we can go back and look at some of those suggestions. I'm also willing to accept from my colleagues additional suggestions. But I agree about the direness of the situation, and we've talked so much about a fiscal cliff, but this is more than that. This is just surreal when looking at these potential cutbacks. Now, I do feel when we say potential that we can try to mitigate as much as possible some of these estimated savings, and try to look at estimated increases too. I know we talked about grant writing, additional looking at some of those as well. So I think it's a time for all of us to put our heads together and just try to get creative in mitigating some of these budgetary departments, and working closely with the city too, the leadership here. Does anybody else have any other questions, concerns, or input? Superintendent, Mr. Jackson, appreciate your presentation. Hearing no other input at this time, and thank you, Secretary Hughes, for your input. I would like to adjourn the meeting at this time. We will conclude at the board meeting next week. And the time is 6:28, and this meeting has been finalized. Thank you. Have a good evening.
That's not a trail breaker, that one. Okay. Okay.